Amen. All right, well, we're talking simplicity, not a surprise there. And again, not too much of a surprise that we're talking about our stuff this evening, but maybe not in the way that you're used to a church talking about it, unless you're one of my former students or you've had me talk in student ministry. Because I think in a lot of ways, I love talking to students about this topic because you don't have a lot of stuff yet, right? And I love this opportunity because I think, for me at least, reminding ourselves this whole conversation is one that's been based on this book by John Mark Comer, The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. And what's so fun about this book is that I have realized, as I shared with you as we started this series, this book was a culmination of about 10 years of conversations that I had with myself or with others. And it was so incredible because for most of that, it was some of the stuff that we've already heard in this series. Stuff about resting, stuff about getting our attention to Jesus, about changing our schedules, about spending time in God's word, about this thing we call Sabbath and rest that Uma walked us through last week. But then in my preparation for this week, I realized that there was a whole nother component that John Mark Comer brought out of the last decade of my life. And it had a whole lot to do with this conversation about stuff. And what's interesting though, is it wasn't just the last decade of my life, but I would tell you this goes all the way back to my days in middle school. I wrestled the whole way through with what it meant that I had stuff and other people didn't. Right? I go back now a little bit about just kind of where we started too, simplicity, the idea of tidying up a little bit. I enjoyed the opportunity when I was a kid. I was this kid. I enjoyed the opportunity to clean my room. Right? I did. But the reason why was because once my room was clean, I was kind of like the guys in Step Brothers. I was like, so much room for activities, right? It felt like all the stuff was away. It wasn't in my way anymore. It wasn't going to hurt anybody else. I'm still annoying to my own family when I show up because I'm like, oh, let me just help. I'll clean up there. I'll clean up this. I'll sweep this. I'll do these different things. Even on my computer desktop, I do this as well, right? When it's just packed full of all the documents for work and things like that. I did this recently. It happened in the last week and a half. I just took them all and I drug them into a folder called To Sort January 2024. Just to clean it up. And it made me feel good, right? When all the stuff is out of the way, right? Even though it's in a cloud junk box, is that what we'd call that? It still felt good to just clear it out of the way to be able to focus on what was actually in front of me, the stuff that didn't matter. Right? As I said, it reminded me of a lot of things that have happened in my life in the last 20 years. And one of the things that I've realized, some of you have heard this from me, my number one least favorite thing in the entire world is moving. I can't stand moving because in the 9 years after high school, I moved a total of 21 times. And I had to come face to face with how much stuff that I had. And this was after experiences that I had of going overseas and seeing people that weren't blessed with as much stuff as I was. I remember my first mission trip, my truly only foreign mission trip, going to Honduras and seeing kids that literally just wore clothes on Sunday because that was the one day that they had a set of clean clothes to be able to wear and acknowledge, right? And I came home with this reminder saying, Lord, what are you trying to tell me with all of the stuff that I have? Recently, I've shared a lot about my middle child syndrome. And y'all, that's heavy with stuff. You accumulate everything that you possibly can because you have to have your own stuff. But think about how much we do this in the broader world. And this is what John Mark Comer's book brought out for me, brought to a close for me, kind of summed it up. And he starts out this chapter on simplicity by pointing out the American gospel. The good news of America is the more that you have, the happier you will be. Right? This is the message that we have been telling ourselves. And truly, it's not just American, it's the Western world. We've been doing this for a while now, though. And you might be asking yourself, why are you talking about my stuff? I'm here to start my year without hurry. What does this have to do without hurry? Well, here's the truth of the matter. Our drive to possess stuff is an engine for hurry. Our drive to want stuff actually causes us to hurry all of the more. Here's the crazy thing, right? Around the mid-20th century, they had kind of predicted that by this time, we would be sitting here, we'd be working in the mornings and taking the afternoons off, but we chose not to. As a culture, as a community. Instead, what happened? We spend money Instead of spending money to get time, we opted for the reverse. We spend time to get money, right? And our culture knows this, right? And over the last probably 70 years, our culture's done a really good job of pulling this out. I mean, I think of stuff that I read in high school, like Death of a Salesman, or maybe the old classic Christmas movie, It's a Wonderful Life. I even remember being in college, going to a play because the title itself was so fascinating to me. It was called You Can't Take It With You. And how many times have I looked at students over the last 8 years and looked at them and said, why? Why would you spend the rest of your life pursuing something that's not gonna go in the casket with you? Why? I said, I've done a lot of funerals. I've not once seen someone take it with them. Right? Our culture knows this about our stuff. And so there's this thing. And here's the thing is, again, by this time we were supposed to be working in the mornings and things, but this is somewhat of a recent problem, right? This is the fun thing that John Mark Comer pointed out. Yes, there's nothing new under the sun, but somehow in the last 100 years, right? Which I joke around when I was born, right? Last 100 years, we've really gotten good at this. Right? And we really transformed the way that we go after stuff in this world. Instead of getting our meaning from the things that we used to, our time together as family and our friends and things like that, which yes, truly bring it, we've now gotten to the point that our meaning is identified by what we consume. Our meaning and our identity become about what we have rather than who we are. And again, this was something that kind of happened for us after the 2 world wars and certainly after the Great Depression. We had this great shift when we felt like we didn't have anything to make it seem like we have to have everything, right? I love this quote from John's book. He said, shopping is now the #1 leisure activity in America, usurping the place previously held by religion. Amazon.com is the new temple. The Visa statement is the new altar. Double-clicking is the new liturgy. Lifestyle bloggers are the priests and priestesses. Money is the new God. Woo, that hits. That's tough to hear, right? And let's take to heart truly this transformation that has happened. A century ago, 90% of Americans were farmers. 100 years ago. 90% of Americans were farmers. Now think about what that means, right? You spent your time growing what you needed, right? When it came to community, right? You were sharing goods with one another rather than going somewhere necessarily and buying. You weren't trying to accumulate wealth. You were really just trying to be in community, do what you had to, make your own stuff. And now, today, only 2% of people in America are in that industry. What a transformation. What a ride that we have been on, right? Speaking of this time, a quote from a Wall Street banker during this time said, we must shift America from a needs to a desires culture. People must be trained to desire, to want new things, even before the old have been entirely consumed. We must shape a new mentality. Man's desires must overshadow his need. And why did he say these things? Because he was coming off of the wars, right? We had all these factories to produce all this stuff for us, and we had to do something with it, and we were good. We were good at making things. We were good at accumulating things. So around the mid-20th century, what did the conversation become? Get stuff, right? Get all the new shiny stuff. And this is, again, I go back, I've helped clean out my grandparents' house. This is a very familiar picture, right? That was the goal. I mean, and again, I'm not blaming anybody for it. I'm just acknowledging what's happened, right? My grandparents came out of the Great Depression. They knew what that was like to have absolutely nothing. And so there was this guilt that was brought into the next generations to get as much stuff as we possibly could. And the people that were making those decisions helped us to say, yes, we have to have the new shiny thing. We have to get stuff because, again, our stuff has now come to identify who we are and bring us meaning. Right, here's a quote from 1927. A change has come over our democracy. It's called consumptionism. The American citizen's first importance to his country is no longer that of citizen, but that of consumer, right? And none of this is really a surprise to us. As John Mark Comer points out in his book, fast forward to today, our consumer economy is now built around people spending money they don't have on things they don't need. And we've all heard how apartments and homes are twice the size they were in the 50s, while our families are half the size. What's the message? Get stuff, because that's where worth and value comes from. And before any of this started, my guy Mark Twain said this: civilization is the limitless multiplication of unnecessary necessities. We have turned things that we want into things that we say that we need. How many times have you parents corrected your kids on that, right? I need that. Do you really need it? No, you want it. But it's all around us. It's in the world all around us. I really appreciate too, some of you may have seen this movie, The Hobbit, The Battle of the Five Armies. You have this idea of this guy, Thorin Oakenshield, who has this, you got that picture for me on the next slide, guys? This idea that this Thorin Oakenshield is after this very particular stone and it consumes his life. There's a dragon, y'all, a dragon. I don't know about you, I feel pretty bold some days. I'm not fighting a dragon. But he cares so much about this stone, this rock, because it's pretty, that he develops what they call this dragon sickness, this anger, this jealousy, this envy toward everybody else. It drives him mad. And this was released in the last 10 years, y'all. What a commentary on the way that the world has tried to pull us away from what matters most. So what do we do with this? We have to ask the question, what does God, what does the creator of us, the creator of all things, the creator of these shiny rocks, have to say about all of our stuff? Well, I kind of said there's nothing new under the sun. Psalm 39 verse 6 says, surely a man goes about as a shadow. Surely for nothing they are in turmoil. Man heaps up wealth and does not know who will gather. When it says does not know who will gather, what he's saying is at some point that man's gonna die and all of his stuff is gonna go to someone else, right? So he spends his life gathering all these things, right? Jesus talks about this, storing all your stuff up in barns. What, for it to stay there? No, use it, right? Jesus talked about it in the words that we shared right after, right? He looks at the birds of the air and the flowers of the field and says, why are you working so hard for stuff that's not going to last? If God provides for the birds of the air and the grass of the field, they're so beautiful and they're so well fed, why are you so worried yourselves? Right? There's some really hard truths that we get to point out here. Paul, we already spent some time with 1 Timothy 6, but look at these verses from 6 and 8. Paul puts the number of our material needs down to just two things. He says, but godliness with contentment is great gain, for we brought nothing into the world, and we cannot take anything out of the world. But if we have food and clothing, with these we will be content. And we say, I don't know. Right? Even if you add the third big one, right? Food, clothing, and shelter. Can we really say, if we just had that, we would be content? We'd be happy even. I love the opportunity in our 8th grade religion class. I do these little devotions and I love the encounter with Jesus and the rich young man. I love pointing it out, right? Especially the detail. And you've heard of this from a sermon recently from me, where Jesus looks at the man and loves him. That's the detail Mark gives us. Before he says, you lack one thing, go sell everything that you have. Go sell everything that you have and then come follow me. And what does the young man do? He walks away sad because he has a whole lot of stuff that he won't be able to take with him, right? Jesus didn't hate him. He knew what was going to happen. He's Jesus. He loved him, which is why he pointed out for him, you might have a problem with where your heart is actually oriented, because I love that opportunity to go and meet people from other places that really true can embody for me, because I struggle with this too, embody for me what true contentment and happiness actually looks like, just acknowledging that God has given us all of these things. Can you imagine? Would you be happy with just food and clothing and shelter? A landmark study that John Mark Comer pointed out that rocked my world, y'all. He said to us, a landmark study determined that there was actually a value. There was actually a point, like an annual salary, that psychologists, right? Not the church, right? Because the church always wants to talk about money. No, not the church. Psychologists, anthropologists have looked at this and studied the correlation between how much somebody makes and their happiness. And they have found that there is a certain number that they have noticed that after you hit that point, your happiness level is either going to plateau or, right, if it starts going up, right, it might still just plateau. It's not gonna get any more than that. But what they see most of the time is that it will start to decline after that. Do you know what that number is? $75,000 a year. After someone makes $75,000 a year, which is a big deal, that's a lot of money, their happiness will no longer go up. You go and make, I gotta make those 6 figures. How many times do I talk to a high schooler that's like, yeah, I gotta go and make 6 figures. That's what the goal of life is. Why? Why is that the goal? Why is it not what gives you purpose and meaning in life? And we see this when we turn to God's word, right? When he invites us to discover what the secret of being content is. And it has a whole lot to do with this word that we're talking about, simplicity. And this is where we get to see what Jesus has to say on this subject. Because I love Jesus and we got to talk about what he has to say, right? One observation that he makes is it is more blessed to give than to receive. Now, as we walk through these, I just want you to acknowledge that Jesus, he kind of knows what he's talking about. But there's a second side to this. Jesus has stepped into humanity, stepped into this world, and as he teaches, he's also just observing how the world works. And when he looks around at the world, what does he see? It's more blessed to give than to receive. That's what I've seen. How about this next one? You cannot serve both God and money. This is there in that Matthew 6 conversation that he's having. He's again just looking at the world and he's seeing the people that are pursuing wealth at all costs. And he's saying, this is just my observation. I'm just calling it like I see it. And hey, I created this world and I created you and I know your heart better than you do. And I'm just saying, only one's gonna be your boss. Who is it? How about this third one? Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions. That's the big guy. That's Jesus that says that. And look at the fullness of what he's saying here. That word life is so important, right? Because especially when you look at the Gospel of John, it's all about life. I have come so that they may have life and have it in abundance, right? John 3:16, God so loved the world that all who believe in him shall not perish but have eternal life. Jesus is all about life. Right? I tell people all the time, the gospel of Jesus Christ, the good news of Jesus Christ is not that he came to take you from being a bad person to a good person, but that he came to take you from death into life. Jesus wants you to know life, and life in all of its fullness, both now and yet in eternity too. So when he looks in his ministry and he's observing how the world works, he's just saying, look, life does not consist in an abundance of possessions. And we can look into our world today and see the exact same thing. How many celebrities end up going down a dark road with all the stuff that they have, having their own form of dragon sickness or something like that? You see, Jesus is all about calling us back to just some of the truths that he knows is true, because he knows where life is found. He knows where abundance can be found, and it's just not in the stuff, the material things of this world. It's gonna be in the stuff that only God can give to you and me. You're not gonna find your identity, Jesus tells us, in your stuff. You're gonna find your identity when you finally start to see yourself through the same eyes that your Creator does. You're not gonna find your purpose in all of your stuff, your meaning in all of your stuff. You're only gonna find it when you fall in line and line up with the way that God has designed you and created you to be. You see the point? The most important things in your life aren't in your closet or your garage or your online portfolio, because that's just not where abundance is going to be found. It's going to be found in Jesus. It's gonna be deeply rooted in him and in his word. And with all of these things that Jesus says so clearly, we have to ask ourselves, do we trust Jesus' observations and teachings or not? Do we trust him or not? because that's what following Jesus is all about. And as I say that, I want to acknowledge, look, Jesus knew what it was to enjoy earthly wealth. How many times do you see him enjoying being invited to a neighbor's banquet, right? Even at the cross, what an incredible observation that the soldiers, right? The robe that Jesus is wearing is so valuable that they are casting lots for it, not wanting to tear it. Jesus knew what it was to have nice things, but what do you see when you look at the fullness of Jesus' ministry? You see this tension that he is walking with. And he invites us to follow with that same tension, to be able to enjoy the material things of this world, absolutely, but to be able to put them in the right place. When they go away, our lives are not lost because our life is found in him, not in everything that we have. And when in doubt, right, on that tension, we get to err on the side of the life that is generous and simple. So with all of this awareness and acknowledgement of just material things in our world, what do? Well, first of all, we have to start asking some good questions. And I do love these questions that John Mark Comer gives to us. You guys can go to the next slide for me. All right, for one, what if the formula more stuff equals more happiness is bad math? Good question. What if more stuff often just equals more stuff? That's true for me, right? A whole lot of stuff just piled in my closet. I'm not gonna sort that. All right, every time I move, like, why do I own so many books? Because you're a pastor, right? Right? But that's what it is, right? How about our next slide too? We got some more good questions coming up. What if more stuff actually equals less of what matters most? Because we're pursuing it at all costs. Because we're going after more stuff, more money, and we're missing the stuff that actually matters and the cool things that God has given to us. What if I were to reject my culture's messaging as half-truth at best, if not a full-on lie, and live into another life-giving message? And this is where we get to see the invitation to consider the solution of simplicity. And what is simplicity? Put simply, simplicity is living with less, right? And what I mean by that is acknowledging what is actually a need and what is a want, and being able to live very clearly, being able to see both of those things, being so grateful and thankful for the things that were giving us that actually have it, and they're not needs, they're just wants. So thankful for those, calling it out that we are just blessed, that God is providing so much for us every single day of our lives, but being happy, content with not living with all the stuff, not living with all the things. I love a few other definitions for it as well. Here's another definition. Simplicity is the intentional promotion of the things we most value and the removal of everything that distracts us from them, right? Actually putting first things first, actually giving our attention to where it matters most by organizing our priorities. Or here's another one. Simplicity is an inward reality that can be seen in an outward lifestyle of choosing to leverage time, money, talents, and possessions toward what matters most. Do you see the consistent theme that we've had from day one here? To start that journey of living your life without hurry, it's gonna start with putting first things first. It's gonna start with having intentionality, which means what? When it comes to simplicity, we've gotta declutter a little bit, folks. And what is clutter? Clutter is anything that does not add value to my life. I appreciate one of the series that I got into in the last decade was the tidying up. Y'all, I loved that. I really did. The Marie Kondo stuff, anybody with me? Nobody? Okay, a few, right? Somebody's just an excellent organizer and help people to really declutter, to say, I don't need all of this stuff. And then that joy it is, right? From our perspective, to go and give it to somebody that does need it, could actually use it, right? Looking through your closets and saying, do I actually need this? Does this add value to my life? Does this spark joy? Okay, no, go over here, right? I love that process. We've got to do the same thing with other things in our life. Are there things that you are pursuing that you just don't need to pursue anymore? That you might need to, at the very least, start the conversation and start thinking about. Because what's the goal? The goal is to live with this high degree of intentionality around what matters most, which for those of us who follow Jesus is Jesus himself and the beautiful life that he gives to us in his kingdom, right? One of the things that we like to do is be able to leave you with some things to think about, maybe a weekly challenge or some advice to take with you. And I got 3 things. Number 1 is when it comes to buying something, right? When it comes to adding something into your life, right? Which can do with money or doesn't do with money, right? When it comes to adding something into your life, consider the cost. What does this addition to my life take away? Right? When it comes to actually buying something, maybe you ask yourself, where did this come from, right? Maybe you tell yourself, like I know, thankfully I don't have this problem. My family thinks I'm nuts for this, but I never impulse buy. I say never is a strong word. Maybe sometimes when there's a candy bar, I gotta have it, maybe that happens, but maybe consider making a plan. Maybe consider having a budget. When you can, share. And again, I'm not just talking about your stuff. I'm not just talking about your money. I'm talking about your time. What does it mean for you to be generous with your time, to focus in on community that actually matters? Get into that habit of giving stuff away when you don't need it, when you find yourself going, actually, this could probably be a blessing to someone else, and enjoy that gift that it is to give something away. And you can also learn to enjoy things without actually owning them too, right? Just count the cost before you bring something new into your life. Number 2, cultivate appreciation, gratitude. Be thankful for the things that you do have. Man alive, was that so hard as a kid. I enjoyed a middle school chapel I got to do last year. I really got to share some really cool points in my life in middle school where I learned this so well. But I'm thankful for them, right? I grew up in a world where I had a whole lot of people that had a whole lot of stuff. And then there was my family, 3rd kid, y'all. I told you this, right? The way the braces conversation went. Oh, Tom, you're the oldest. Oh, Michelle, you're the girl. Lee, you're fine. Bill, you're the baby, right? So I can understand how it is to see so many people around you with so much stuff, but then you come to appreciate what you actually do have. And it's a beautiful thing. Cultivate that deep appreciation for the things that God's already placed in your life. Cultivate appreciation for his creation, for the simple pleasures like a cup of coffee or a cup of tea or a home-cooked meal. Walk outside, go on an evening stroll, the things in this life that are so free and is so wonderful. Number 3, lead a cheerful revolt. I love that phrase, right? Because we love being rebels, especially us rule followers, right? An invitation to actually revolt against the way that our culture calls us to be, right? And not in an angry way, not in a fighting way, but in a way that is starkly different, in the same way that Jesus's message had when it first landed on those people, when he told them they didn't have to worry about tomorrow because tomorrow would worry about itself. What a revolt to what the rest of the world says and calls us into. Right? To recognize what the rest of the world is doing, right? It's just calling us to spend. Everybody wants your money. Everybody in the entire world wants it, right? We see that. That's advertising. They do a great job of it. It's a fascinating field to really discover the things, right? But actually to lead a revolt against the materialism, saying, actually the things of this world don't matter to me because I've got a king who calls me to think differently, live differently, consider differently the things that he's provided for me. And finally, number 4, consider Philippians 4. I want to land here because I think this is just a beautiful passage. And I want to look at 3 verses here. Let's look at verse 10. Paul says, I rejoice in the Lord greatly that now at length you have revived your concern for me. You were indeed concerned for me, but you had no opportunity, right? He's talking about how they were providing for him. They wanted to provide for him so bad, but they hadn't had the opportunity. Verse 11, not that I am speaking of being in need, for I've learned in whatever situation I am to be content. And we say, Paul, tell us the secret. How? Paul, who had to wander around the Mediterranean world, spend years of his life, risk it all, his health, his safety, every single bit. And here he is saying, I've learned in whatever situation I'm to be content. Tell us how, Paul. He does, verse 12. And then into verse 13 eventually. That's my misspelling. This is verse 12, it's not 10. I know how to be brought low, and I know how to abound. In any and every circumstance, I have learned the secret of facing plenty and hunger, abundance and need. And here's that secret. I can do all things through him who strengthens me. What an incredible verse for us to hold tightly to, a verse that is quoted so often in Christian culture, but to see the fullness of what he's saying here. Look, I don't need the things of this world because I have Jesus, and he will be, until my dying breath, the strength that I need. Let's go to the next verse, or the next slide. As you think about this then, ask yourself that question. Where's your heart at right now? What's pulling at it? What are the worries that Satan is using so good to pull you away from what matters most? And as you think about this too, just take to heart this really, really cool truth. As distracted as you and I get, right, and as much stuff fills our lives, the creator of all things, all the shiny stuff, all the things in your closet, all the things in your garage, right, that eventually made those things at least, he has all that. And yet when it comes to ask him the question, what matters most, he looks at you. He looks at you, which motivated him to send his son to die on the cross, to rise again, so that you get to experience the fullness of everything that he has with no doubt, no question in your mind, because he did it. He worked for it. You don't have to. And not just now, but in a day that's still to come. And because of that, right, our struggle with this world and all the things of this world, it's not gonna win. It doesn't have to, because he has freed you. He has freed you to acknowledge that there is such a thing as peace in this world that pursues so many things, that calls you to want to desire so many things. But he invites you, because of what he has done, to look at him and see that in him you have all that you need. Amen? Amen.